Good morning. New year, new start. Look ahead, they tell us. Don't look back. Of course, it's not quite the same thing. Looking back, we can see perhaps not everything, but a lot. Looking ahead, we see nothing, clearly. This time last year, we didn't see the coronavirus pandemic coming. Nevertheless, staring into the mist and the vagueness, it seems clear enough. Three things will loom large in 2021. Getting that vaccine out. The real results, not the rhetoric of being outside the EU. And the determination of many Scots to leave the United Kingdom. This morning, with the Prime Minister Boris Johnson here in the studio, those three big question marks dominate our agenda. And of course, I'll be talking to Mr Johnson about this morning's row over whether to keep schools open. Because it isn't just Scotland whose politics have been shaken by that trade deal. I'm joined by the First Minister of Northern Ireland and DUP leader Arlene Foster. To talk about the vaccine and the challenges still ahead this winter, I'm talking to Professor Mark Walport, the sage advisor and former chief scientific advisor to the government. And to hear more about the real situation in British hospitals, we'll hear as well from Dr Alison Pittard, Dean of the Faculty of Emergency Medicine. And on this exceptionally busy morning, I'll be looking at the news with the help of the Sun columnist Jane Moore and our own deputy political editor Vicki Young. Before all of that, the news headlines with Roger Johnson.
Andrew, thank you. Good morning. The Chief Inspector of Schools in England has warned that children's futures cannot be furloughed until the number of coronavirus cases falls. Teaching unions say the growth in COVID cases means it's not safe for teachers and pupils to return across England tomorrow. But writing in the Sunday Telegraph, the head of Ofsted, Amanda Spielman, warns that time away from the classroom is harming children's mental health and social skills. The government says online learning is a last resort. Supplies of a coronavirus jab produced by Oxford University and AstraZeneca are being distributed around the UK in preparation for vaccinations to begin tomorrow. 530,000 doses of the vaccine will be available from tomorrow. They'll be administered at a small number of hospitals for the first few days before the bulk of supplies are sent to GP-led services to be rolled out across the UK. The Shadow Culture Secretary and Cardiff Central MP Joe Stevens is being treated in hospital for COVID-19. A statement about the 54-year-old MP was released on her Twitter feed last night. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, described her as a dear friend and colleague and wished her well. A group of US Republican senators say that they will refuse to certify Joe Biden's election victory unless a commission is set up to investigate alleged voter fraud. The 11 senators and senators-elect, led by Ted Cruz, want an audit of the unsubstantiated allegations. They're not expected to succeed. The outgoing president, Donald Trump, has refused to concede, repeatedly alleging fraud without providing any evidence. And the Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg is celebrating her 18th birthday today. In an interview with the Sunday Times, she reveals that she's given up buying new clothes, but says she doesn't want to tell other people how to act. Asked what birthday present she would like, she said replacements for the headlights on her bike. That's it from me. Next news here on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Back to you, Andrew.
Many thanks. Admirably modest. Now to the papers. That story you were hearing about on the news headlines, we must not furlough our children's future. That's the head of Ofsted warning about the consequences of not opening schools. On the other side of the argument, the Observer's front page, teachers take legal action as chaos grips school plan. It says the Sunday People has given a little bit of a insight into the real situation in hospitals. A mother and daughter, the mother about to die. Don't let this be you, it says. We must be remembering all the time what's going on in hospitals. The Sunday Times, we're all wondering about who's going to get the vaccine, has a story about the postcode lottery for life-saving jab. It says there are lots of parts of England where they say there is simply not a centre near enough to older people for them to be vaccinated easily or safely. And finally, the Mail on Sunday, new jab policy, that's one jab, not two, will save lives, said the very eminent and popular Van Tam, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer. So lots to talk about there. And we're going to start with Vicki Young. Vicki, this is really all about what's going on in hospitals, and you've chosen, I think, the Mail on Sunday to start with.
Yeah, and these stories everywhere, been broadcasting them, and they're in the papers as well, about what's going on in hospitals, because, of course, this is about reducing deaths, but also about, as we've said before, protecting the NHS. And the problem now is that, particularly starting in the London and the South East, a new variant of the virus is spreading much more quickly. And if you look at some of the positivity rates, the percentage of tests coming back positive in London has reached 24%. So this isn't about more testing being done. It's about more people with the illness and, of course, ending up inevitably in hospital. And many hospitals across London now cancelling their non-urgent operations, and some suggesting they might even have to go further than that to free up beds because they are treating so many with COVID. So some really stark stories in the papers.
And this is a London problem spreading across the rest of the country at the moment.
And that is the real issue here, isn't it? At the moment, yes, London and the South East. Is there any suggestion that it's not going to go elsewhere? Now, scientists have already detected the new variant in other parts of the country. And so if it continues to transmit much more quickly, the problem they've got is the restrictions already in place are not keeping the virus down below that.
So more has to change. One of the things, Jane Moore, that may have to change is closing all primary schools as well as secondary schools for the time being. That is a huge and very, very difficult political choice for the Prime Minister, isn't it?
It is, and I suppose there the key word is political. That's what's sort of getting a lot of people's backs up, is that, you know, children's education must not become a political football. And the Observer front page, which you mentioned, about the chaos gripping the school plan. You know, the unions have advised teachers not to go back. Heads have taken legal action against government plans. This is in England, by the way. And senior Tories, or certain senior Tories, are warning that schools could stay closed now for weeks. Now, I think a lot of people looking at this will go, well, back in March, we understood the school closures. We understood the national lockdown because nobody really knew what they were dealing with. But here we are, you know, 8, 9, 10 months on, and no forward planning seems to have been done. The scientists have always said there would be a second wave. We always suspected there would be a sort of a mutation. Where is the planning as to how this is going to be happening?
I suppose, Jane, what the government would say is, first of all, it is our absolute intention to keep schools open. That's been their position so far. Yeah. And that this new variant is something they could not have foreseen.
Well, yes, but it's a variant of the same virus. Yeah. And viruses do have variants. You know, that is, there's nothing new here. I know that the actual virus itself was new back in March, but the fact that viruses mutate is not new. So why is there not some sort of plan? I mean, it beggars belief that teachers were not put on the vaccine list right at the very beginning. And then maybe we wouldn't have this issue of the unions being able to say that schools are unsafe.
Is there Jane, to jump in, is there a danger, do you think, that the government simply loses control of this situation? Andy Burnham, Mayor of Manchester, Greater Manchester, has said that it's really important that either the government allows local authorities like Brighton to close schools, or else makes a very clear decision itself to close schools, goes on to a higher tier level. In other words, Brighton are closing schools, Birmingham are saying that they will back schools that choose to close, and now Manchester's moving in as well. So it appears as if the centre of this is moving away from the Department of Education and down to the local councils.
Yeah, which I think is probably the right decision because, you know, some areas don't have as many cases as others. And no teacher should be forced to go and teach in a school if they feel unsafe. But there's an awful lot of teachers that would go back and teach children. And, you know, as Amanda Spielman said, you mentioned earlier, the Ofsted chief inspector, you know, we can't furlough a children's future. And it's all about their mental health as well, their socialisation. Yeah. And, you know, my youngest daughter had her GCSEs cancelled earlier this year. They're now talking about the possibility of GCSEs and A-levels being cancelled this year as well. Now, I go on my local park to walk my dog. It is full of teenagers, all hanging out. They need their friends. Now, if they were in school, they've got masks, there's social distancing measures in place. For me, in a way, it's almost more dangerous for their mental health and for their education to not be at school.
Yes. Vicki, a hideous political decision for the government, frankly, this. Meanwhile, we're all waiting for the vaccine. And just talk us through the Sunday Times story about postcode lotteries.
Yeah, I mean, this is the positive side of the way out of this, which everyone now realises is going to be the only way out of it, which is the vaccination. How quickly can you get through the numbers required to protect people? Now, the Sunday Times has got a story here saying postcode lottery for the jab, saying that actually there's lots of areas of the country where there are no vaccination centres. Now, I think part of the issue here is that the Pfizer jab, of course, had to be stored at a very low temperature in a freezer.
So
not everyone was set up for
pass
that.
Around the country.
But of course, the good news is that the Oxford AstraZeneca jab, which is coming on stream from tomorrow, doesn't have to be handled in the same way. So it should give more flexibility. But I think what everyone really wants to know, and actually what the Mail on Sunday's got here, is a picture here and going through the whole process of the vaccine. Who's going to get it? When will they get it? How many people need to get it to make sure that we are protected? And also the vaccine venues here. Now, I think, again, what's interesting is talking here about, I think 1 million people have already had the vaccination, looking at now another 1 million a week to get the jab, and then 2 million a week by February. And this is all the big aim at the end here, according to the Mail on Sunday, is to get 15 million people vaccinated, because they see that as the magic number. That would be most people over 65, younger people with underlying health conditions.
And they
that
can
should
start
help
to allow normal life.
That's the big question.
Restart.
And I think that's going to be the big political question for the government in about 6 weeks' time is, will it allow everyone else to go about their business or not? And that's going to be when it gets very difficult for them politically, I think.
And in 6 weeks' time, Vicki, you'll be there to give us the answers, I know. Jane, the other big, difficult ethical question, really, is about whether the people who've had the first Pfizer jab, those of virtually everybody who's been vaccinated so far, get the second one. The government are now saying they don't get the second one because they want to spread it more widely, and that will, in the end, save more lives. But again, this is a difficult ethical dilemma, isn't it?
Well, it's very confusing. I mean, my mother has had the first vaccine. She had it before Christmas. We went to St George's Hospital in Tooting. It was running like a well-oiled machine. I cannot praise the staff there highly enough. It took a lot for me to get my mother to have the vaccine. The needle phobia, you know, she's confused, she's scared, like a lot of people are. They've been sort of cooped up in their homes since March. It came onto the market. We were all told this is going to be amazing. The first jab's going to give you 40% efficacy. When you have the second, you'll be fully, you know, protected or whatever to a certain 95%. Now that's all changed. So she was due to have her second vaccine on January the 11th. We don't know. We've not heard anything. We've not heard that it's been cancelled. We're just reading in the newspapers that it has. So now my mother's saying, well, am I protected? Am I not protected?
The scientific advice, Jane, is that she is protected. I mean, that's what Jonathan Van Tam and others are saying. That's
changed, because at the very beginning, they were saying that the first jab gives you sort of 40-50%, and the second jab, you know, boosts you to... So I don't know. It's natural that people are going to feel suspicious and sort of say, well, what is going on here? And are these figures being massaged because they actually don't want to give out the second doses? Because, again, the red tape, you know, the army of people out there, retired medics who are happy to help, who've got to fill out 21 pages of tape forms about, have you done this course and that course? Again,
lots of bumps. Okay.
The forward planning. So Boris Johnson, you know, has come out today. This is a triumph for British science. It is the AstraZeneca vaccine, the Pfizer one. Triumph indeed, but not a triumph for the organisation and the forward planning skills of the government from where I'm standing.
Well, indeed. All right, let's turn finally to Vicki. Another story, Vicki. I'm going to move us away from Brexit and to a related story in a way, which is the future of the Union. We know that there's going to be elections in Scotland early this year, and we know that the SNP is romping ahead in the polls and are calling for another independence referendum. And we also know that Boris Johnson is very likely to say, well, you can't have one. And I suppose the question is, what happens next?
Yeah, I mean, the pressure will absolutely grow if that is the case and if that is the result of those elections in May. And a big, big question for him about how does he handle it. Now, he can say no for a while, but is that really sustainable in the long run? Now, those who are pushing for independence for Scotland are pointing to opinion polls suggesting actually the number backing it is rising. But of course, Brexit as part of that, I think, and COVID in a way, if you look at the the way we talk about four nations in a way we never did before, actually. The leaders of all the nations have had a higher profile, the mighty England, if you like, which always dominates all of that. And a really interesting article here from Alex Massey, and basically, making the point here that Brexit is happening for England and Wales, but to Scotland and Northern Ireland. And actually, the way that Brexit comes into this again, of course, Northern Ireland being treated differently from the rest of the United Kingdom when it comes to following some of the regulations still of the European Union means a lot of pressure there as well.
Absolutely. Well, that's all we've got time for. I should say to all of those people watching, wondering, will I get my second dose? You will get your second dose. It's just a question of when. Thank you both very much indeed, Jane and Vicky. And now to the weather. Quite a lot of the country's seen some real snow over the past week. Elsewhere, it has been raw and windy. What's next? Over to Chris Fawkes. Chris.
Yes, Andrew, we saw the snow showers come in yesterday, particularly across East Scotland and Northern England. This was a scene near Romley, I think Evero Country Park here, looking pretty gorgeous. Today, the air's very slightly less chilly, and that means a greater proportion of the showers, and there are lots of those showers, will be falling as rain for East Scotland, eastern areas of England. There is still some snow around, but it's mainly across some of the higher elevations, above, say, 200 or 300 metres elevation in the Grampians, southern uplands, Cheviots and the Pennines as well. It is a cold day, temperatures 4 to 6 degrees Celsius, the best of any dry weather and sunshine in the north and west, but we will have these cold winds feeding in particularly for East Scotland and eastern areas of England. Overnight tonight, if anything, we're going to drag in some slightly colder air coming in from Scandinavia, and so some of those showers will tend to turn more wintry in nature, so a mixture of sleet and snow becoming a bit more commonplace. Ice and frost again widespread, temperatures at the lowest, probably about -8 in the Highlands. And then tomorrow, it is another day of sunshine and showers. The showers clumping together to give some wet weather, though, in Kent. And we could have a line of showers working into parts of Yorkshire, maybe bringing some very localised falls of snow across some of the eastern Pennine areas. The best of the dry weather and sunshine in the northwest. But, Andrew, it stays cold all week.
And makes me feel I don't like Mondays. Chris, thanks very much indeed for that. Now then, there are few people in the country who understand the difficulties of the decisions ministers have had to take better than Professor Mark Walport, the government chief scientific advisor, who still advises the government, former chief scientific advisor, I should say. He still advises the government as part of the SAGE committee. I asked him a little while ago whether it was possible to keep schools open and still keep control of the virus.
Well, we now have a much more transmissible variant, and I'm afraid this is the sort of natural evolution of viruses. The ones that can transmit the most effectively have an advantage over other variants. And so it's clear that this new variant is transmitting more readily. It's transmitting more readily in younger age groups as well. It's important to note that it doesn't appear to cause worse disease or that it's going to be more resistant to the effects of the vaccine, but it is going to be very, very difficult to keep it under control without much tighter social distancing measures.
And would that include closing schools?
Well, potentially. I mean, we know that transmission occurs within schools. We know that a person between 12 and 16 is 7 times more likely than others in a household to bring the infection into a household. And we know that there was a small but a dip in the amount of transmission in school children after the half term, which then went up again when they went back.
What more could the government be telling us to do? What more could we be doing now to try and stop this?
Well, really, at the end of the day, the thing that actually stops the virus, and we know that it can do, is keeping people apart. The virus can only get from one person to another through proximity. And so it really is about doing everything we possibly can to keep ourselves as safe as possible. And, of course, that really does involve making sure as far as possible that we protect the most vulnerable, who by and large are the elderly people, but people with cancer and other diseases in society. And the other side of the coin, as I've said, is we've really got to get this vaccine out there, or the vaccines out there, as quickly as we possibly can.
Looking backwards, my question is, did it have to be like this? In other words, had we had the circuit breaker lockdown back in September, had we opened up more slowly in the summer, had we not opened up things during December, would we have been able to avoid this, do you think?
Well, I mean, the retrospectoscope is an infinitely powerful instrument, Andrew, and it's absolutely clear we can see other countries, Vietnam, for example, which has managed to keep its cases down. But we can see that sort of Western liberal democracies have found it much harder. The UK is not alone in this, but that doesn't necessarily make it any better. So I think the important thing is to look forward. And looking forward, the good news is that we have a vaccine, and that has been a most extraordinary effort, actually. And the vaccines appear to be more successful than we might have hoped for, actually. The challenge now is to get them out there.
Exactly. And the question is whether we can jump to sort of millions of people being vaccinated every week rather than the small number we've got at the moment.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. And it really does take it. And people mustn't think that because they've had the vaccine that they can immediately go out and party. There are lots of things we don't know about the vaccines. It seems likely that they will reduce the transmission. And of course, in order to maximize the benefit of the vaccines, the plan at the moment is to give the first dose to as many people as possible and to give the second dose a little bit later at about 12 weeks.
These restrictions have been in place since December the 20th or thereabouts. These Tier 4 restrictions, and yet the epidemic is spreading. Hospitals are quite close to being overwhelmed around the country. Are these Tier 4 restrictions, therefore, enough, really?
It's the Tier 4 restrictions, it's obeying them, it is thinking about breaking essentially every possible route of transmission we possibly can. Those are the things that are absolutely necessary, and it is pretty clear we're going to need more.
Sir Mark Walport, thanks very much indeed for talking to us this morning.
Pleasure.
Now, the Prime Minister's trade deal with the EU did bring sighs of relief from much of industry and the Tory party, but it does mean extra checks on goods passing from Britain into Northern Ireland, something my next guest, Arlene Foster, the First Minister there, once described as a blood-red line that could not be crossed. Arlene Foster, I hope you're warm enough there. Thanks for joining us. You have crossed that line, and you are now in charge of quite complicated procedures between Britain and Northern Ireland. As a government, that's something that must distress you a bit.
Well, good morning, Andrew, from a very cold but a very beautiful County Fermanagh here in Northern Ireland. First of all, I welcome the fact that we do have a free trade deal because it does deal with some of the great difficulties that there are with the protocol. Now, my job is to, of course, we voted against the protocol. We didn't want the protocol, but it's here. Therefore, I have to mitigate against that. My job from now on is to mitigate against those excesses and to hold the government to account for what they claimed would be unfettered access from Northern Ireland into Great Britain, our largest market, of course, and also from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, because there is that interconnectivity across the UK for our businesses and our citizens and our young people, and therefore we need to make sure that that happens, and that's my job of work for the coming year in this, our centenary year in Northern Ireland.
Do you accept that there is now a border in the Irish Sea?
Well, it's my job to mitigate against that, and we've been doing that through a number of committees. There's a regulatory issue there. Of course, we always had SPS checks, Andrew. You know that. When animals and animal products came across into Northern Ireland, those were checked on a very minor basis, and we need to make sure that that minor basis continues, because if you look at goods that come in from New Zealand into the European Union, only 2% of those are checked. So why, in heaven's name, would you check more goods coming from Great Britain into Northern Ireland when the SPS rules are actually still the same?
And yet, I've got a list of the extra red tape that's now available. EORI numbers, simplified frontier declarations, supplementary declarations, safety and security declarations, goods and vehicle movement services. I could go on and on and on. I won't, but it looks very like a border.
Well, you know, I could stand here and bemoan the fact that we have left the European Union with a protocol. I wish that that wasn't the case. Or I can now look for the opportunities as we move out of the EU. We're out of the customs union, we're out of the common agricultural policy, the common fisheries policy, but we do have to deal with this regulatory issue for 4 years. And then the Assembly votes on whether they want to remain within that regulatory system for goods. And I hope by that stage that people will see that it's much better to move out of those regulations and into the global market, which the rest of the UK can engage in.
Do you look at this process and worry that this may have weakened the British Union, as it were, the British Northern Irish Union? I know that some of your colleagues, the Sinn Féin colleagues, not surprisingly, see this as a huge opportunity and the beginning of the process for a united Ireland and a border poll, that this is the beginning of that.
well, they've been arguing that for 50 years and longer now, that they're moving towards that situation. But let me say very clearly, actually we have seen this year more than most in 2020 the fact that it is so important to have the union between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. We have benefited greatly in terms of how we deal with COVID. We have had £3 billion from the Westminster Exchequer given to Northern Ireland to help us to deal with COVID. We've been able to benefit from the fact that the UK was the first nation in the world to have the vaccination rolled out. We have, of course, our National Health Service, something that isn't in the Republic of Ireland. And I think it is important to say that, of course, republicanism and nationalism wanted a no-deal Brexit. They didn't want a free trade because that would have meant that they could have pointed to the disaster of Brexit. What we have now is a gateway of opportunity. It's a gateway of opportunity for the whole of the UK and for Northern Ireland. And it's important that in this centenary year that we look forward to that and we step through that gateway of opportunity and take the opportunities that are there for all of our people.
You mentioned COVID just now. Can you guarantee that pupils sitting GCSEs and A-levels in Northern Ireland will be back at school on the 11th of January?
Well, that is our plan. As you know, it's important that we do plan for our young people. They have missed out far too much on education during COVID. I really am concerned about the life chances for our young people. We've always prided ourselves on our education system here in Northern Ireland. And of course, the best place for our young people is in schools. Therefore, we will do all that we can to keep our young people in schools. However, we do recognise this with this new mutant version of COVID-19 that there are difficulties that it transmits amongst younger people, and therefore we have to take that into consideration. I certainly don't want to be in a position of keeping our young people at home, but let me say this, it is important that we get young people into schools again, but we have to have remote learning for a short period of time, and I hope it is a short period of time.
So people will have listened carefully. You can't give a complete guarantee for obvious reasons, and there might be remote learning. Of course, Northern Ireland is in lockdown at the moment. Do you think the rest of the UK should follow suit?
Well, that's a matter, of course, for the Prime Minister as he looks across the United Kingdom. I think the way in which we have communicated Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and, of course, Westminster throughout this COVID pandemic has been a positive of the Union, and we now need to build on that to make sure that the vaccine rolls out in a positive way. I was very pleased to see the fact that the vaccine was administered across the UK on the same day in the four nations of the UK.
So in the same sense of the four nations of the UK, do you think there should be a four-nation UK lockdown to get on top of this?
Well, that's a matter for the Prime Minister to lead on, listening, of course, to SAGE, listening to his advisers. We here in Northern Ireland have been dealing with, unfortunately, a growth in COVID-19, and therefore we took the decision just before Christmas to go into this lockdown. I think, actually, the regionalisation of how we deal with COVID is a strength, not a weakness, actually, of the United Kingdom, and it's something that we should celebrate in terms of dealing with it locally. But overall, in terms of COVID-19, we have been able to work together as a UK, and I think that's a positive as well.
Arlene Foster, thanks very much indeed for joining us on a chilly morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, as we've heard in the papers, the situation in quite a lot of the British hospitals is frankly a bit scary this morning. It's not just about beds, but about the exhaustion of staff. And you can't get more of them in a hurry. Just before we came on air, I spoke to Dr Alison Pittard, who is Dean of the Faculty of Intensive Care Medicine and a hospital doctor herself in Leeds. I asked her for a picture of what's going on in hospitals right now.
So as happened in the first wave, there's quite a variety when you look over the whole of the country. And as we've seen across all media platforms, the NHS in London and the surrounding areas are under immense pressure at the moment. And it's really difficult for staff because obviously we want to make sure that everyone is cared for, but also need to look after the staff as well. So it's really difficult for everyone working in NHS hospitals at the moment, and particularly in my area of intensive care.
And does this mean that hospitals are going to have to stop doing a lot of elective or other operations and services simply because of shortage of staff?
Well, obviously, that is one of the ways that the NHS managed in the first wave was to do that, to reduce the normal activity so that we could focus on COVID patients, but obviously tried to maintain the more urgent cases. And one of the things that we have done now during the second wave is to continue normal activity alongside COVID-related activity. And we want to continue that at all costs. And one of the messages I would like to get out to the public is that if you have any concerns, whether it's about COVID or not, you must seek advice and help. So we plan to continue as much normal activity as possible. But of course, some of the non-urgent stuff will need to be postponed.
A lot of people watching this will be simply saying, we've got all these new Nightingale hospitals, surely we can just use these.
That's what people would think. It's just an easy thing to do that, and it isn't. There are logistical issues to try and open up those areas. Some of those Nightingale hospitals have been used throughout the pandemic, not necessarily for COVID patients, but some have been used to support diagnostic services. And the way the Nightingale hospitals are used is different depending on the local need as to where they are placed. And what we always need to make sure is that, because it's staff that are our limiting factor, that we need to make sure that the patients who are cared for in those areas make the most efficient use of the staff that we have available. And we need to make sure it's safe as well. So they will be used, but not necessarily as intensive care units.
Are you seeing any change in the age profile of people coming in with COVID at the moment?
I think actually that the age group is a lot lower than it was in the first wave. And I think that's probably because more people are getting COVID, and it is affecting younger people, and perhaps younger people are actually realising how serious it is, and therefore they need to seek input as well. But we are still seeing older patients. We're treating the whole age range. Sure. So that's not changed. But yes, it does affect younger people. So just because you're not in the older age bracket doesn't mean that you're immune to this disease. I have heard reports of people as young as 30, 35 being in intensive care with COVID. And obviously, the younger you are, the better your body is at coping with the disease. But still, younger people will die from COVID because we never know how people are going to respond to it.
From the perspective of your colleagues working in intensive care, what is the difference between what's happening now and what was happening at the worst of the first wave back in April, say?
There are a lot of positives, I think, from having been through the first wave, because we've learnt a lot, and so we're much better prepared in terms of how we manage patients when they first come into hospital, how we treat them when they come to intensive care. And we are much more comfortable at managing patients. It's almost like we know what's coming our way. We know how to deal with it. So we feel much more confident. One of the downsides is that because we've been through it all before, staff are very, very tired. And that's the thing that concerns me is the staff. Because we can't just create staff overnight. We can get more drugs, we can get more beds and equipment, but we can't just get staff. So that is the real concern this time round.
Dr Pittard, thank you very much indeed for getting up and talking to us this morning. Much appreciated.
You're welcome.
Well, as we've established, this is a very grave moment for the country. Infections rocketing and many London hospitals brimful, others rapidly filling. In addition, huge numbers of parents simply don't know whether to send their children to primary school tomorrow morning. I'm joined now live in the studio by the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Mr Johnson, welcome. Can I start with a very straightforward question? Yes. Should parents of primary school children in England send them to school tomorrow morning?
Yes, absolutely they should, in the areas where schools are open. And what we're doing clearly is grappling with a new variant of the virus, which is surging particularly in London and the southeast, and that's why we've had to take exceptional measures for some parts to close primary schools, keep primary schools closed temporarily. Not something anybody wants to do. We've really fought very hard throughout this pandemic across the country to keep schools open for lots of reasons. That schools are safe. Very, very important to stress that. The threat to the risk to kids, to young people, is really very, very, very small indeed, as the scientists continually attest. The risk to staff is very small. And of course, the benefits of education are so huge. Overwhelmingly, we want to keep our young people, keep children, keep kids in education, because that's the best thing for them. So that's why we've worked so hard to do it. So I would advise that all parents thinking about what to do, look at where your area is. Overwhelmingly, you'll be in a part of the country where primary schools tomorrow will be open.
The reason I ask is that SAGE told you on the 22nd of December that you couldn't keep on top of this new variant while keeping schools open.
Well, actually, what they said was that we needed to take tougher measures. Sir Mark Walport, you just talked to, agrees, and I agree with that. I think the issue really we've got to work out.
He said it was unlikely schools would be able to stay open, given where we are.
The issue and the evidence is not clear, because we're looking at Tier 4 and what happens in Tier 4 areas, and we need to see whether those extra steps that we've all taken in Tier 4 areas are going to work in driving the virus down. And
so if they don't work, you may close primary schools.
Andrew, we've got to keep things under constant review. But we will be driven not by any political considerations, but entirely by the public health question. And
that's
the issue.
The public health suggestion was that you will have to close schools to get on top of this new variant.
There are different views, obviously, that are offered, and it's worth stressing that other public health experts also point to the long-term damage to children and young people from being kept out of school, the social cost, the danger, the threat to mental health, the many other factors that you have to bear in mind,
because
particularly deprivation for families in left behind communities. You've got to think very, very hard about the consequences for families of closing schools.
Absolutely understand that. So are you going to take legal action against a council like Brighton, for instance, which is just unilaterally closing its primary schools?
Well, we'll work very hard with authorities across the country to get our message across that we think schools are safe. Their schools are safe. There's absolutely no doubt.
So do you condemn them for closing the schools?
And I understand people's frustrations. I understand people's anxieties. But there is no doubt in my mind that schools are safe and that education is a priority. And if you think about the history of the pandemic, we've kept schools going for a long, long time in areas where the pandemic has really been at very high levels. And you think about what they did in the Northwest, for instance.
And the question is whether that was a good thing to do.
And yet, the evidence actually is that they were able to do that and to get the virus under control. So the question now is, can we do that in these Tier 4 areas? Can we bring the virus under control and keep schools open? And what I can tell you, Andrew, is that we will keep this under constant review, but we will be driven by public health considerations and by the massive importance of education to children.
A lot of parents are very worried and very confused, partly because, for instance, in London, in Greenwich, your education secretary was threatening legal action to keep schools open, then 3 days later ordered them to be closed. When a council like Brighton says schools may close, Birmingham is saying much the same thing. In Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham has said this is a decision that now must be taken by local authorities. There is a sense that up and down the country, local authorities and some schools have given up on the government on this and are taking matters into their own hands.
I don't think that's the case, but obviously we're going to work with local authorities, work with schools and those responsible up and down the country. Our advice remains the same, which is that for public health reasons, we think in the large majority of the country, large parts of the country, it is sensible to continue to keep schools open, primary schools. As you know, secondary schools are coming back
so what
a bit
are you
later.
Going to do about it?
And the second thing is that we are going to be ramping up testing across the whole of the system. And I don't think people have focused enough on this, if I may, just for a second. One of the things we didn't have when we went into the first lockdown, where we sadly did have to close schools, was we didn't have this huge number of lateral flow tests. We now have tens, hundreds of millions of lateral flow tests, which I believe and hope can be used, deployed, particularly in secondary schools, to assist the return of schools. And it's not that the return will be safe. The schools are safe. The issue is, how can you stop schools being places where the virus can circulate and then spread into all the other households? And daily lateral flow testing or weekly lateral flow testing in schools, I believe can make a huge difference.
So let's talk about right now. I ask you again, what is your message to those councils around England who are saying that schools can close and should close? What's your message to them now?
My message to such councils is that they should be guided by the public health advice, which at the moment is that schools are safe in those areas where we're not being driven by the new variant to close them. That the priority has got to be children's education, but obviously we want to work with them. I mean, we've got to be humble. We've got to be humble in the face of the impact of this new variant of the virus. We've got to. Let's face it.
That means
we face a very, very difficult few weeks and months until the vaccine comes on stream.
That means if I ask you whether you can guarantee that schools will open on the 18th of January, you can't say yes, can you?
Well, obviously, we're going to continue to assess the impact of the Tier 4 measures, the Tier 3 measures. If you think about it, where we'd got to before Christmas, if you recall,
I'm going to come to that in a second.
Was that the Tier 3 measures had actually been pretty effective in dealing with the old variant of the virus, and you remember what had happened in the northwest. There was a real progress that had been made, and then we saw this very stubborn strain or this stubborn epidemic in Kent and parts of London. And people were saying, what's all that about? Are they doing things differently? Are they failing to follow the guidance? And that wasn't it.
And then we will get to that.
If you recall, what happened was on the 18th, we became aware of this new variant. And since then, that's why schools have been dragged in. We now have to look at a package.
If you can't guarantee that schools are going to open later this month, isn't it now the right time to accept that GCSE and A-level exams are going to have to stop this year?
First of all, we think that in principle it's a good thing to keep schools open if we can.
But in practice, they may have to close and you may have to stop the exams.
And we've got to be realistic. We've got to be realistic about the pace at which this new variant has spread and it is spreading. We've got to be realistic about the impact that it's having on our NHS, as you've heard just now, or you've heard all morning. And we've got to be humble in the face of this virus. We have some things that are really working for us. We have a vaccine, 2 vaccines already, or 3 that we'll be able to use soon.
3.
Well, we've got the Moderna coming.
Moderna's coming as well. Okay.
So we can see the way ahead. We can see what's coming down the track in terms of a route forward for our country. We can see how we're going to get out of this with great clarity now. We can see how the vaccines can really help us to beat this.
I want to talk directly about the vaccines.
We do have a tough period ahead.
Can I move away from schools and ask whether it may be necessary in the near future to have tougher restrictions than we've got at the moment? Some kind of Tier 5 people are talking about.
I mean, I'm sorry, I want to answer your question about exams as well, Andrew, because what I'm trying to get, the message I'm trying to get over to people is, I think the same time I was on with you last time in October, you said, how does it look? And I said we were going to have a very bumpy period at Christmas and beyond, but I thought that by the spring things would be better. I stick to that. I think that's roughly how it's going to be. It may be that we need to do things in the next few weeks that will be tougher in many parts of the country. I'm fully reconciled to that, and I bet the people of this country are reconciled to that, because
what might tougher be
until the vaccine really comes on stream in a massive way. We're fighting this virus with the same set of tools.
I'm just trying to understand what this might mean. And I'm thinking back to March when we were restricted to an hour's exercise Other countries have used a curfew system. There was a complete ban on any household mixing. Is that the kind of thing a so-called Tier 5 might mean?
You've spoken about Tier 5. I haven't said that, but there are obviously a range of tougher measures that we would have to consider. I don't want to speculate.
What might they be?
I'm not going to speculate now about what they would be, but I'm sure that all our viewers and listeners will understand what the sort of things. And you've mentioned some, clearly school closures, which we had to do in
57,000
is
new
one
cases.
Is one of those things.
Isn't it?
It's not something.
Now?
It's not something we necessarily want to do. And
isn't it time to act now, given how many new cases there are every single day?
The situation is very difficult. I think when you look at the country as a whole, what people may reasonably say is to take school closures. They struggled on keeping schools open. They got the virus down throughout some very difficult months in the autumn. Why would they suddenly be closed now when the rates of infection are lower than they were then? So there's a sort of fairness issue.
Some places they're much higher, of course.
They are, and they're much higher here in the southeast, in London, and the southeast. They're certainly much higher. That's why it's necessary to take the tough action that we've had on schools. It's not something we relish doing at all. But I hope people are getting from this that we are entirely reconciled. This is the crucial point. We're entirely reconciled to doing what it takes to get the virus down.
Let's talk about the AstraZeneca vaccine.
That may involve tougher measures in the weeks ahead.
Let's talk about the AstraZeneca vaccine. We were told originally that by now there'd be 30 million doses available for us, and then it was changed to 4 million doses. How many doses are ready to go tomorrow?
Well, you've got to make the distinction, I think, between the number of doses that exist in the country and then that are ready to go into the arm. So I believe that tomorrow at the 540 or so GP vaccination sites, 101 or so hospital sites, there will be 530,000 AstraZeneca, Oxford AstraZeneca vaccines. And
how many Pfizer ones?
Well, that's on top of the million or so that have already been vaccinated
still to be used. How many
Pfizer? There are a few millions more of Pfizer still to be used. I don't want to go into
People might expect you to know the numbers. It's so important.
We are rolling them out as fast as we can. And the issue is not so much one of distribution. And I saw some of your earlier guests sort of saying, well, and I know that the Health Secretary has taken steps to get rid of that pointless bureaucracy. In a week and so on. I can't give you that yet. What I can tell you is that obviously everybody is working flat out to do this. We're greatly in advance of all comparable countries, but we do hope that we'll be able to do tens of millions in the course of the next 3 months. I can certainly give you that figure. And
you mentioned,
and that's why.
Okay.
When you think about that figure, Andrew, that's why I go back to what I said in October, which I still think holds good in the sense that. Yeah.
Right.
So
okay.
I do think that is starting to look like.
Let's talk
obviously,
about. Okay,
let's talk
obviously,
about. We can't
let's talk
be
about how we got
100% certain.
Let's talk about how we got.
I hope that will be a real inflection point.
So let's now talk about how we got here. Back in July, your government commissioned a report into what was going to happen in this winter. And Keir Starmer said to you, have you read it? And you hadn't read it. Have you read it now?
Well, let's be absolutely clear that this government has taken every possible step that we reasonably could to prepare this country for the consequences of winter. What we could not have foreseen, I think,
let's come on
reasonably,
to that.
was the arrival of a new variant of the vaccine. But which was spreading between 50 and 70% faster.
What we have here is that report.
Once we did understand that,
so
on the 18th of December at 3:15 p.m., we took decisive action.
Except that this report, which you perhaps should have read in July, does talk directly about the danger of mutation this winter and describes in extraordinary detail exactly what is happening now.
Which is exactly why we took the action that we did.
But you should have known it. You were warned in advance.
Yeah, but
and this report says the way to deal with this is to stop community transmission or to hold it back, which of course, frankly, the government has failed to do.
Well, with the greatest respect, Andrew,
well,
the government has done everything we can to urge people not to allow community transmission.
You've urged, but you haven't acted. On the 21st of September, when there were 6,000 new cases a day, SAGE talked about there being a national lockdown being necessary, a circuit breaker, and you waited for you waited for 7 weeks.
You could have spent
7 weeks, and it was then £24,000.
This is absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. You could have spent from March onwards. You could have spent the entire year in lockdown. You could have closed every
your own scientific advisors. You say you follow the science. Your own scientific advisors said time for a lockdown.
Scientific advisors have said all sorts of different things at different times.
So you're not following the science.
They're by no means unanimous. And what is absolutely clear, of course, is that you could have, from March onwards, you could have closed down all transmission of. The government could have basically pastoralised the UK economy.
You could have done that.
And by the way, there are people who advocate that. There are scientists who say that would have been the sensible thing.
And a lot of people would be alive now who aren't if you'd done that.
However, the damage to people's mental health, the damage to the long-term prospects of young people growing up in this country, the exacerbation of the gap between rich and poor, that would have been colossal. And it was the job of government to manage a very, very difficult situation, which is being faced by every liberal democracy in Western Europe, as I think Sir Mark Walport just pointed out. And when you talk about how we should have locked down in September or done things differently. Plenty of people have tried to do that. I think
the virus spread a lot in those 7 weeks. In those 7 weeks, the virus spread very fast.
They had a lockdown I seem to remember, in Wales in September. They locked down tight. They then took the brakes off, and the virus immediately surged again. What we could not have reasonably predicted was that the virus would be spreading again by 50 to 70% faster. And actually, if you look at what
you couldn't have known that, but you did know the mutations were likely.
But look at what the Tier 3 measures were achieving. And I think this is where people should remember the achievement of people in Liverpool, in Manchester, other parts of the country, where working together with mass community testing,
Liverpool,
they got the virus down.
Liverpool, which did what you want.
Liverpool, achievement,
which did what you want, are now calling for a national lockdown.
Well, there are plenty of places that worked very, very hard and very, very well to get the virus well down. And I don't believe it would have been sensible to have forced all those areas into more extreme measures, particularly after they'd already shown that by pulling together as a community, they could do what it took.
A lot of people up and down the country, a lot of people up and down the country are saying that you simply moved too late. In each case, you have been buffeted by events, you've held off for too long, and you've done the right thing a few weeks too late.
I make the same point. People will always argue that, and I think it was Sir Mark Walport who just said on your show just now that the retrospectoscope is a magnificent instrument. But
Except
actually,
you had the report.
No,
you had the report. You didn't need the retrospective scope. You had the prediction.
No, I don't think anybody could reasonably quarrel with this point. If you want to stop coronavirus spreading, then of course it's open to you or to any government to close down the entire economy for the duration. If you look at all these examples of fire breaks or circuit breakers, all they do is buy you some temporary respite. What we're doing now is using the tiering system, which is a very tough system.
And about to get tougher.
And alas, probably about to get tougher, to keep things under control. But we'll review it.
Okay.
We'll review it. And we have the prospect of vaccines coming down the track in their tens of millions, offering people literally life and hope.
I want to talk about two other big issues.
And that, I think, is something that should keep people going in what I predicted back on your show in October would be a very bumpy period right now. It is bumpy, and it's going to be bumpy.
And a lot of people are observing this from afar, including in Scotland. And there are, if I am a Scottish...
Why do you say afar?
Well, Scotland's a little while away from where we're sitting now. It's 500 miles or so away.
Part of our country.
400. Well, that is my point. If I am a Scottish voter, imagine me as a Scottish voter sitting in Edinburgh or Glasgow. Maybe I voted in favour of the union in the referendum. But since then, I've seen Brexit happen, and I don't like Brexit. And I've seen the way your government's behaved over the coronavirus pandemic, and I prefer Nicola Sturgeon's version of that. And I want my country, Scotland, to leave the UK. What are the democratic tools in my hands to do that?
Well, I think that obviously the most important thing is the referendum that you had in 2014, which was a very important...
Before Brexit and before the pandemic, things have changed. And a lot of people want to leave the UK.
I mean, life moves on, things change. I don't if you're saying that you would like to have another referendum...
This Scottish voter would like another referendum and wants the Democrat... He's only got a vote. So he wants to use that vote to allow it to happen. How can they do that?
I think the only point I would make is that referendums, in my experience, direct experience in this country, are not particularly jolly events. They
change things.
They don't have a notably unifying force in the national mood.
All right,
how about that?
Let's move to Brexit, because the OBR says 4% down on GDP as a result of Brexit. You say there's lots and lots of opportunities, and we're able to trade without non-tariff barriers or tariff barriers with the EU. But this, I'm waving lots of paper at you this morning, but this is your own government's handbook of rules for exporters to the EU. It's 159 pages of red tape and new declarations, which a lot of small companies simply won't be able to do.
Well, first of all, of course, there are going to be changes, and we've made that clear.
Looks like a non-tariff barrier.
We've made that clear, and actually, I think that there's a great opportunity for British SMEs and for exporters of all kinds, because now that, why don't you pick that up and wave it again?
159 pages of bump.
Now that
red tape.
That is, of course, all that you have to do to sell around the world. And
to the EU.
And so what we've seen is many companies in this country not exporting in the way that they could. We have fantastic
Why
companies.
would 159 pages of bump make them likelier to export?
Well, I mean, the tragic reality of business life is that there is some bureaucracy. We're trying to remove it, but we have a massive opportunity to expand our horizons and to think globally and to think big. And this is the moment for this country. If you look,
you use these big words. You say globally and big, and you get excited when we talk about sovereignty. I'm interested in what this is actually going to mean for ordinary voters, people who voted for you, for instance, in parts of the country that feel left behind.
Well, for instance,
how would a voter in Lee, I'll give you an example of Lee, how will a voter in Lee benefit from changes to the way you regulate, I don't know, the IT industry or AI or whatever? Industries which are based in London, Birmingham, Cambridge and Manchester, but not in Lee. How are they going to benefit from that in real terms?
For instance, they've already got substantial sums of money coming back into this country as a result of leaving the EU. We've got control over our borders. A points-based immigration system has already been established. And then when it comes to areas in parts of the country that feel that they've been left behind, one of the things that you can do, for instance, to say nothing of all the regulatory changes that you can make, one of the things you can do is have free ports. Which
we could do inside the EU.
Not to nothing like the same extent. Well, and you can use
80 free
tax
ports.
systems and subsidies in order to drive investment.
The more you use subsidies, the more we will face tariffs later on as a result of the deal that you've struck. It does mean tariffs and it does mean barriers if we subsidise in ways that the EU feel is uncompetitive for their companies.
Well, it's true that there is a clause that says that either side can take action if they feel that the other side is unfairly undercutting them in some way, and that's a potentially rather valuable thing for us. We might, for instance, want to legislate to do things differently and better. For instance, one of the things we've done on day one of leaving the European Union is get rid of pulse trawling, of stopping people from using.
Again, we could have done that inside the EU. The French have done it.
But we've done it from day one.
As it happens, but it's to do with leaving the EU.
No, it's true. We will be able to ban these huge Hoover trawlers that come in and hoover up everything off the bottom of the sea.
All right. Well, listen, we are out of time. I'm afraid we're out of time.
Welfare.
I was going to ask you about your own future, whether you're going to carry on as Prime Minister after Brexit, but we are out of time. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
I think what you should break out of your characteristic gloom, if I may say so, Andrew. Things are very tough. We're going through a very tough period as a country, but I really think people should focus on the amazing fact this country has created a room temperature vaccine which can be used around the world, and we now have freedoms that we haven't had for 50 years, and there are lots of reasons to be very positive about this otherwise grim new year.
An Englishman talking to a Scot. Boris Johnson, thanks very much indeed for coming in. Thanks to all my guests for watching. I'll be back here next week where my guests will include the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer. But until then, goodbye.